Okay. Okay, so we just debriefed a little bit. Welcome, everybody. And we just debriefed a little bit about a couple of families who did some spring break college visits. And I just wanted to ask if anybody had any questions or thoughts about college visits, virtual or in person or otherwise, before we go on to other topics. Okay, let's see. So we can always come back to that, okay? And so welcome, let's see, to our Parents of Juniors monthly meeting. As we know, it's optional, and some people had a little bit of trouble logging in, and I think part of that was my error. So if you are watching this later and you had trouble logging in, I apologize, and we'll get that straightened out for the future. But tonight we've got a few different things we can talk about. Um, Certainly, if you have any questions, you'll let me know throughout. The folks who are here said they didn't come in with any specific questions, but were excited about some of the topics that I had listed as potential topics for tonight. And some of those topics, if you scroll down below in small letters, are reflecting on the admissions cycle of how this 2022 session went. And I've got some slides. That reminds me that I want to put in the chat that's okay. In a minute, I'm going to put in the chat the link for these slides so that you can be looking at the slides that I have that are some data about the admissions cycle this time and what happened. And I want you to have access to that because I'm not going to talk through each slide, but I thought they might be interesting for you to see. And then if you want to debrief anything about college fair, we can do that. I wanted to review the application timeline, what needs to happen now and what over the summer. We just did some college visit reflecting, and the big highlight I heard from that was that it was really great for students to have a chance to put themselves on a college campus and see themselves possibly going, right? Or likely going and looking for places that were good fits. And it was pretty obvious to at least one family that certain schools were better fits than others, and that it was hard to tell about that fit before going. You know, on paper, it all sounded good, and in the virtual sessions sounded good, and then being on the campus gave their student and them a different sense. So it was something, and not everybody can do it all around the country or the world, but it's a great idea to just visit college campuses close by, right? Like right in our city, we've got Seattle University, we've got University of Washington, we've got Seattle Pacific University. I just was recommending to somebody today to go down to take a look at Evergreen, and as much as people can while, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. I'm just going to mute you for a sec, Nick. Oh, he went away. Oh, because he's going back over to the iPad. Okay, cool. What was I going to say? Great idea to visit, if possible, like while students are still on campus. And if not, you know, summer's a great time to visit too. And then also there's still fall. So there is time to be scheduling these visits. And it's just good to get on campuses to try to help students imagine really going, you know? So, okay, so I'm going to stop share for a second and put these slides in the chat. And then I will come back to doing that. Okay. Thanks for your patience. Here's the slide link. Okay. Okay. So, and if you want to, you can make a copy or whatever, so you can write all over them, or, or you can take notes in there and we can all see them if you want to too. Okay, so I'm going to go back to sharing that screen. Okay. So, all right. So, just really quickly before we go on, I hope there wasn't an error in the Loom link I sent out via email, but not too long ago tonight, like 15 minutes ago, maybe you got an email. I never know what happens with these broadcasts that I send via Council More. I'd actually be very glad for your feedback about that. It's convenient for me to send through there because all of your emails are already in there. And I, like do a broadcast and I say send it to the whole class of 23, right? Like that kind of thing. So it's easy. But do you actually get those emails, or do they go to spam, or what happens? That's a question. And I sent out
I
an
got
email.
mine.
You got yours just a few minutes ago about this issue
Mhm.
of, okay, of registering for the workshops. Okay. So there was supposed to be a Loom video where I talk about doing it. And when I sent it out to the young people in a text link, apparently there was an error in that. So let me know if that's not working somehow. But the big idea is, as pretty soon, I mean, in that email is the link to go into Schedulicity and find my colleague's company, which is called 7 Points Prep, and then register in 7 Points Prep workshops for one session on May 14th or 15th, one session on the 21st or 22nd, if you can, right? If you can't, that's okay, and I will record at least one of them. And one session on June 4th or 5th, and then, if possible, one the week of July 18th or one the week of August 1st. So there's more there. Any questions about that? All right. Okay, so reflecting on the admission cycle, what the heck happened in 2022? Let's go on to that. Oh, first, sorry. Nope. First was the timeline. Somebody asked, just making sure, where are we right now and what needs to happen? So here we are right at the end of April. And really what your young people are working on is getting ready for their AP exams in the next few weeks, right? So I don't actually expect much of them between now and that May 14th time when we have our first, or 14th, 15th, when we have our first workshop. Some students I do have a meeting with right after their APs, like on the 11th, I've got a meeting, or, some in that week. It depends on the young person's schedule. But I'm not expecting a lot. But if they've got extra time, the big idea of what they're looking for is research into schools that are on their potentials list, what they like about them, what they don't like about them, because they're working on building that list, balanced list of 6 to 12 schools that they're going to present to you as schools that they'd like to apply to and why. That's the big project. And then excuse me, at those workshops in May and June, what we're going to do is start this process of the application. And really, it, where we say first essay drafts, it really should say college application components, right? And the main components are, one, all sorts of demographic information about and family history, and like if your family went to higher education, where, when, what your jobs are, how much education people in their family have had, if anybody in their family has gone to those schools. It also asks about demographics of like other people in your family, siblings, this kind of stuff. Then it asks for information about what young people have spent their time doing, and we call that the activities list. And that's the first workshop series in May is about opening up the application, filling in all that information about your family, and then working on the list of activities. And it's funny, when I, 30 years ago did that part of my application, I didn't dream that that was that important to them. Like, yeah, and I really thought that quantity was more important than quality. Like, it was about how many, activities I had. But that really isn't it. It's really, they want to know how you spend your time for real, whether it's, working in your family's business or taking care of people in your family, or if it's video gaming all day, every day, then like, let's come up with some interesting way to talk about that, they want to know what they're doing. And so it takes some craft to really work on that activities list. So that's why I want to do a workshop to frame it with a bunch of people at once, but then work individually with kids. And so that's what they're going to be working on over the summer, is all of those application components. And then if they're applying to liberal arts colleges and liberal arts colleges that aren't super top tier, or maybe even some super top tier, those colleges could have interviews going on anytime from now until the fall. And that's something that you can go on the website and find out if they offer those, and register for them. I know, Suzanne, do you have a second to talk about? Ari did one, right?
Yeah, he did one, and he enjoyed it. And I mean, he's sort of, thinks he knows everything. So he was like, I told them exactly what they want to hear, except he forgot something that, he thought was really important later, but sort of funny. But he's very social and easy with that kind of stuff. So for him, that was a no brainer. Like I signed him up for it without having any idea, because when I was just figuring out the days we were going to go here and there. And I was like, really? Like an interview before you even have any idea? Okay. Some of the schools aren't set up like that, but this one was. And yeah, for him, it was like, this is great. And I'm going to do this, wherever. I think he will try and do additional interviews in other schools that he's interested in, because same thing, he's trying to, get into liberal arts schools that aren't the very top of the top. So it's going to make some difference for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hopefully.
And for the rest of you, and for Ari, if I know in advance that there's an interview going on, we can do some prep for that if you want. And if you want to do it on your own, in the schooling doula links on CouncilMore at the bottom, the shared resources, there's a whole folder about visits and interviews, and it has both questions for visits and information about doing interviews and like sample questions and stuff like that. I've been an interviewer for my alma mater undergraduate college for some years, and so like have lists of those questions, what gets asked, and can practice that with people. So, but the flip side is that there are the super, like the top 20 most selective colleges in the United States typically offer alumni interviews after the application is submitted. So those would happen in November to January. And they would just contact the student and say, you have an opportunity for an interview on this day with this person. Would you like it? And I recommend accepting the offer for an interview, but they are with alumni representatives. They're not with admissions officers, generally speaking. So it's more like a demonstrating interest and get your questions answered than it is a hoop to jump through that really strongly affects your admission result. So does anybody have any questions about interviews, college application timeline.
Yeah, so the schools that do admission staff interviews do them over the summer?
They don't even do those anymore. Like the way that, I mean, some of them do, but almost, I mean, maybe some of RE schools do. Like I need
Well,
to
you
find
were
out.
saying like that, I was
Yeah.
confused by what you said because
Okay.
you have it over the summer
Yeah. Well,
in
so
the
that's what,
timeline, and
yeah. So
so
you're
I
right.
wasn't sure
You're right.
what you
So,
meant by that.
okay. What I mean by that is they offer, so some schools like was it Clark that offered the
Hmm.
student interview? Okay.
Yeah.
So those schools offer interviews as part of their opportunity for students to demonstrate interest as part of the lead up to submitting the application. And they may be admissions officers, but more often they are people who like are low level students who work in the admissions office or other people. But yes, they happen from now all the way over the summer and in early fall. And it's a good idea if like once the list is settled or earlier to go on and see if the schools that the young person's interested in offer those kinds of interviews and register for one. And then there are those other schools that offer them afterwards. And they are different though. If you applied to school 30 years ago or more, we used to have to go to campus and sit, with an admissions officer in
Let
their
me go
office.
find
And
out what Ari wants. He's calling me,
yeah,
and I'm on the phone. Evan, can you
okay, I'm
please?
gonna mute you. Um, anyway, it's different because they found that it wasn't that predictive of actual like student success or anything, and that so it wasn't super useful for them. And it was also a matter of equity, like who had skills and who had resources to get to campus to do the interviews, et cetera. So they've kind of outsourced that to alums and student interviewers. But it's still a good chance to get your questions answered and to make the effort, demonstrate interest. Okay, last thing on this timeline is that I've talked with some of your students and others not as much about this spring being the right time to identify teachers who you want to be hopefully writing your letters of recommendation. So it's a great idea to ask them in person and then follow up with information about you. Sometimes teachers have a form that they ask students to complete. And if they don't have that, then I have example letters and example forms that you can use to give to a teacher that has information about your activities, about what your interests, your majors, where you're applying, that kind of stuff, so that teachers can write the most detailed, specific letter of recommendation that really puts students' best selves forward. The person who you want to write the letter of recommendation is somebody who, as best they can give specific examples of how that young person has contributed in class or contributed in the school and how they're likely to contribute when they come to campus. So and it's a little tough, right? Because this has been mostly an uninterrupted in-person year. So hopefully by the end of this year, students will have at least somebody who could write them a letter of rec. But it's also okay if kids get to the end of this year and are like, I am not sure. I'm happy to help them brainstorm. And it's possible, if worse comes to worse, that a senior year teacher will be able to do it. But ideally, it's a junior or younger teacher. Any questions about that?
I have a couple questions.
Yep.
The couple schools that we did tours, um, they were pretty specific about how many letters of recommendation. Like, for example, they want two. one from a teacher and one from your school counselor. So my questions are, is it offensive if you submit more than two?
Hmm.
And also, my daughter barely knows her college counselor. I think she's had a different college counselor every year.
Mhm.
It seems weird to ask someone who barely knows her to write a letter of recommendation, yet both of the schools that we toured both said that they wanted one of the letters to be from a college counselor.
Yeah.
What are your
So
thoughts on that?
yeah, give you some insight there. That's actually generally a requirement that the school counselor sends a letter for each young person on their caseload. And a lot of times in our Seattle public schools, with the caseload that people have and the number of things they have to attend to in addition to college support, is that it's a boilerplate letter with as many specifics as they can find from what the young person has put into Naviance. So there are going to be some assignments within Naviance, which is, I can stop share my screen if any one of you can actually pull it up. I don't have access to it right now because I'm temporarily not a high school parent, but for the next 4 years after this, I'll be able to do it again. But if you go into Naviance, you should be able to see there are different assignments that students have that are required for graduation, and some of them are things like your activities, your resume, like they need you to put your resume in there, and that's something that they can refer to while they're writing the letter or adding to the letter. And then there might be things in there about majors or areas of interest. And that's at least why, has Delia ever met with her counselor? They're supposed to have at least one meeting where they get to know something about them and take a bunch of notes so that they can add into that letter. Yeah. So, and there's this other thing called the school profile that you can ask the counselor for. I have it for Garfield. I don't know if I have it for Lincoln and Cleveland, but I would love to have it for Lincoln and Cleveland. So if you could ask your school counselor for that. That school profile is included in the application also, which helps the college or university get a sense of that high school's offerings, that high school's typical students, like where they go off to college. They typically have a list of the range of schools that students are accepted to or enroll. They talk about demographics of the student community. And then what classes were possible for your young person to have taken will be on that school profile also. And so your student is compared to other students at their school as far as what they did and took advantage of. And it's based on that school profile. And the counselors write that thing. So, and it is typically publicly available, so it's probably searchable. Cleveland High School school profile, Lincoln High School school profile.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
I
what
have
are
a
your thoughts
question.
on submitting?
Do you want to connect to that, Suzanne and Susan?
Well, I was just going to say, I have a question related to that, but that I think you can, I'll just cover it during your results for this year.
Okay.
But it is about Garfield specifically. So
Okay. Okay.
just, yeah.
Okay. And Susan, how to connect?
And just what are your thoughts about them submitting more than
Oh, right. Thank you. Yeah.
more than two?
So I think I'm going to stop share this and then try to share council more for a second. So my general idea is to follow the directions. So if they say it's fine with us if you submit additional recommendations, then great, yeah, sure, submit additional recommendations. If they say we only want We only want one, and we want that one to come from either a humanities or a STEM teacher. Then we follow those directions. That's generally what I recommend, and I wanted to show you how you could find that information if you get yourself into Council more. Okay, there we go. Okay, cool. So many screens, I'm sure you understand. All right. Okay, so here's my sample student. Here's their, remember when they go to the list, there's this view, which is called the tile view. And then if you want to go to the spreadsheet version, that's grid. But let's see if this person has anything in their app tracker. They do. Okay, so the schools that they've put hearts on are the ones that they're saying, okay, I really do want to for sure apply to those. And those will then see the heart here matches the heart here on the app tracker. And so that's where it'll be. And among the columns in the app tracker is here about the number of recommendations and evaluations. And so let's see what DePaul says. So the school report required, that's what I was talking to you about, the school profile. That's the thing the counselor sends. Final report means like how they did at the end of the year. These are both things that the counselor is in charge of sending, and they will do whether your student directly asks them or not. If your student will go into Naviance and say, I'm applying to these places, or go into the Common App and click that they're applying to those places, and the counselor will be notified, and the counselor will know that they need to send those things. And then this piece, the teacher evaluation at DePaul, 0 are required, but 2 are optional. So that's what I would say. And then they also have other evaluations, 0 required and 2 optional. So it's my read from this that one could send 4 evaluations to DePaul. But none of them is required. And let's see what the others, jump in if you've got a question. This one, which is this, Northwestern, had 1 required and 2 optional teacher evaluations. And what is this craziness? This is their test optional policy is also there on their recommendations. That's weird. And then the counselor recommendation. That's just completely standard. Everywhere is going to require a counselor recommendation, which I agree with you is strange. So that's the reason, though, to encourage your young person to actually go to the meeting with their counselor and value the relationship with the counselor. So, yeah. Okay. And then is there something else? I'm trying to think, right? So like University of Washington does not want you, it says here, right? We ask that you not send them. Please don't send them. Okay. Don't send us anything. And we need to honor that, or they're going to be like, annoyed. And it could be a reason not to be interested in your application. I hear from college admissions officers a lot, like this is an evaluation of whether the young person can follow directions.
Well, so that is a question that I have then. When it says, like, let's say it says, teacher and other, like, does that mean, I don't think this is going to, I don't envision a situation where we're going to have more than 2 than teacher recommendations plus the counselor, but there might be 2. But let's say it said 1 teacher and then 1 other or 2 other or something like that. Would you have any reason or want to add another teacher, or would you just in our case, like Ari's going to have probably somebody that he's going to spend the whole summer with at his job because he's living there, right? And so that might be a recommendation, and that would fit into other.
Yeah.
So do you have
Yeah.
a sense of that with what other really means? Does it mean like definitely not another teacher, or could be another teacher, or could be someone else?
Yeah. So like on this one for Gonzaga, they say one required teacher, one optional teacher. So, and then other, and I think if on the Gonzaga website, there would say more specifically what this means, because this is summary data. So it's always a good
Okay.
idea to check
Yeah.
specifically. But these others could be your camp person, could be a music teacher, because often these teacher evaluations ideally are somebody from a core academic subject. Um, and so I would look at putting together basically the whole application. We think about what are the pieces of Ari or Delia or Patrick or students, of parents who are listening afterwards. What are the components of them that they want to put forward in the application? And then which pieces show those components? Okay. And the personal statement might show certain things, and the activities list will show certain things, and supplemental essays will show certain things. And what will the recommendations do? Right. Like, and we want the recommendations to add to that overall picture of the young person. And ideally, right, we're giving the college a picture that makes coherent sense to them. When they put all the pieces together, they're like, ah, I want that kid at our school. I can see them here. And we're really looking for evaluations that add to that, like add specifically what is that young person going to contribute. We don't want just like they're a great kid, you know. And so it's important. It's a really important decision, like who's going to do it, and whether they are capable of doing, you know, justice to the specificity and everything that's required. And so the good thing about that, and like working with me, is that you're thinking about it now, because after APs, there will be time for asking a teacher this and getting it together to share with the teachers things that they might think about writing. And maybe the teacher would even have time to work on some of that letter, because they're not paid to do it, right? So this is like time to write a handwritten thank you note, maybe give them some chocolate or whatever they like. You know, it's a labor of love that they do. And you know, it's been hard to develop relationships, and so I could, if I were a parent right now, I might be like, oh my gosh, I don't know who's going to write my kid, you know, a good recommendation. But that's something that, you know, there's time to work on, like late May, September. We can work on that. Yeah. Other questions? Let's see about any of the stuff that's on here. I was just thinking, timeline related, right? Like if you'll remember, and maybe Susan, not in your arrangement with me, but I like to support people having their applications in these early times, even if they're not going to apply early decision. Try to be ready in the fall with having applications ready to go. So like University of Washington, it says here that they don't have early action or early decision. They don't, but their application is due at the same time early as those other ones. So so the fall is when it's happening. And so really between May and October, that's the time that we're going to be working on the applications primarily. And it feels to kids like that's a really long time, but I don't know if you guys, you probably are with me and realize like how quickly that's going to go, given that it's summer. And also the time that it takes young people to learn to be reflective enough about their their gifts, their talents, their strengths, and what they have to offer college, it takes a little while to get to coherence about that. So I'm glad that we're starting early and that we've got some time. Yeah. Sorry about the background noise. All right. For time, I'm thinking we should at least go to highlights of reflecting on this admission cycle. Does that work for you guys? Okay. Let's find that again. All right. Okay. So, let's see. So the good thing is I've already shared these slides with you. This person's name is George Fan. And at the beginning, when I was taking screenshots, I hadn't figured out how to make his face go away. So in the first few slides, George will be there. And he is the president of a company called College Kickstart, to which I subscribe. It's a healthy fee, but I really like what they do. They take all of the common data set information. So if you wanted to look in detail about any particular school, about the number of students who applied and the number of students who was accepted and how many were male identified, female identified, how many were students of color, how many, all sorts of stats, you could Google common data set and the name of the school. And College Kickstart compiles all of that information in one place so that we don't all have to go look in depth at every college's common data set. And so it's a great value add. And when your young people put together their draft lists, we're going to run the lists through College Kickstart to help understand the balance. Like if we have a good mix of likelies and unlikelies and targets. And so anyway, that's the big idea. And so he did this presentation about reflecting on the application cycle. And so the big takeaway is that, you know, we're hearing that, wow, things are crazy. People who used to get into University of Washington no problem are not getting into University of Washington no problem anymore. Same, you know, with schools all around the country. And it's true that this year was an 11% higher application volume. And over the 2 years, in some schools, there was like 30% higher application volume. And part of the reason of that is that with test optional, there's been expanded access. And these other two about hedging bets is because more people are applying to more places. And so people are like, oh, well, then I need to apply to more places, right? And so they're throwing in more applications to hedge their bets. And the final is that some young people are swinging for the fences, you know, thinking like, okay, well, Harvard's test optional, what the heck? Let me, you know, try for it. And so the application volume increased mostly at the most selective schools. And there are definitely schools that are desperate for students, right? So it's not across the board in the 4,000 schools in the United States that they're all oversubscribed or receiving more applications than they know what to deal with. It's just the most selective schools. And then the other point that's relevant for some people in our group is this issue of gap year deferrals, that because there's so much over enrollment going on, and they don't know who's going to yield. They don't know who's actually coming. Some schools are declining to accept students' requests to do a deferral for a gap year. And so that's something to consider now, while if a gap year is something that you're wanting to do, in putting together your list, research with schools directly how supportive they are of gap years.
So I have a question
Yep.
about that in
Great.
terms of researching with the school.
Mhm.
Like, it seems if you raise your hand and say, hey, I really want to apply, but like I want to take a gap year, then then you've just alerted them
Yeah.
that you
So,
might not come. And so how do you
right.
do that?
Good question. What I would recommend is doing some not direct research first, Googling, etc. And let me know, and I can put the word out to my national networks of people. And also there are in my networks, there are professional gap year consultants who have their finger on the pulse. And there's also an organization called Gap Year Association, I think. And so checking in there first, and then if the school has been friendly to gap years in the past, then talking with an admissions officer about that possibility. Pardon me for a second while I contact my family to get the dog settled. Okay. Do you guys want to see the dog? Because sometimes when you have to hear an annoying dog, it's better to just see the dog. Okay. There's the cute dog. Oh, so cute. Okay. All right. Now everybody can see that. Okay.
Dog.
Yeah. Okay. And these are like overall highlights, right? Okay. And so there was a big hit on regular decision admit rates at the most selective schools, and testing still appears to matter. I love that word appears there, because it's really all correlation and not causation right now. We really, the evidence is still, being gathered. Okay. And it is a natural experiment, and we will have more and more data in the next few years, and we'll be able to say. But so far, my big takeaway is that students who are outstanding students already and who have resources found themselves able to take tests and submit tests. And those students at highly selective schools were admitted at greater rates than students who did not submit scores. But that does not answer anything about how that came to be true, and whether those students were just already very strong students. And there were students who were admitted test optional at all of those places, and some places it's like 50-50. So it's not across the board. And I will add that in Seattle, it's been very difficult to take the assessments, and so it's very legitimate to be test optional in any case. This having to drive 2 hours and stay overnight in a hotel is just absolutely not equitable. And there will be a space to write about that on most college applications, about why you choose to submit scores or not submit scores, etc. And I will coach people to write about how.
Where's the parent essay where you get to write to the
Right.
college about how Seattle Public Schools is the most BS institution
Yeah.
in the whole world, that they talk about equity and then do that and take away the school testing day?
Yeah. So there will be a school testing day in October, and it'll be what it is. But I think that on a national level, people understand that in our little micro area and in the California metropolitan area, micro areas, testing is not the same as around the rest of the country. And so I think the stats that you're going to see in the next few slides, if you look at them on your own, are not all about Seattle area students. if that makes sense. So we're just going to have to see how things go.
So
But
one
yep.
question that brings up just curiosity is, and I'm sure, I mean, you know, you can just take the University of Washington, I'm guessing, out of,
Oh, right.
you know, out of this, but, you know, they just reported this last week that college enrollment all over Washington was down. And granted, that's also, you know, that a lot of that is community and technical colleges.
Yes.
But it was basically said, like, system wide, you know, that enrollments were down 7%, which isn't
Yeah.
huge, but
Yep.
still. So I'm curious, again, my kid's not interested in the University of Washington, but like, is that also Wazoo and Western and the other schools? Like, or
Yeah.
is it just community and technical colleges? It was not clear from the Seattle Times article, really.
Right. I found that too, that it wasn't super clear. I do know that Western, Eastern, Central are all accepting applications still right now.
Hmm.
And I don't know about Bothell or Tacoma, but I do know that University of Washington had record application numbers and turned down, you know, more people than they ever have before, et cetera. So I think that what we're seeing in our state is being replicated around the country, that with this era of social media and rankings, the two things together, and like TV and big sports and all this, you know, like people are applying to only a very small number of schools, whereas there are 4,000 places to go to school, and many of those are under enrolled and closing. I don't know if you saw in the news this week, there are universities and colleges that are having to close because they're not financially sustainable anymore. So, you know, it's not everywhere. It's just at certain places. So, yeah. And we need to encourage people to go. So I was excited to read there. I hadn't quite understood the degree to which Washington does have funds to support
For
students to
financial aid,
go
yeah.
to college. So I thought we should all spread the word on that one as much as possible. Yeah. Okay, well, there are a bunch of slides. It is 8:17. So I can stick around, but if you need to go, I would encourage you just to flip through these. And if you have questions, I'm just thinking about if there's anything that's, I think this is just talking about like the application growth, like the sheer number of applications that came in was higher. Let's see, and that's about, so, okay, so if you need to go, let me just say this one thing, that private colleges and some state schools that aren't ours are relying on early decision, so those early applications to fill the class, meaning like, you know, at least half of the class comes in the first round. And that has pros and cons. For the university and college, it's like completely a win. But for students and families, it's really not a great thing other than thinking just for yourself. If you have enough money to pay for it, then okay, you have an increased chance of getting admitted, but you don't have any wiggle room with the financial piece. So if they come back and you're accepted early decision, you it's binding, you need to go and you have to accept their financial package. And if you go regular decision, then you get to compare offers across schools. And so regular decision is like a better financial deal for students, and kind of a better deal for students in that they have longer to think about, you know, where they might like to go and comparing and visiting and all those things. But if you're very clear that you want to go to a most selective, a very selective, or a selective school and you've had enough time and you have enough financial resources to pay for it, then early decision does make individual sense to consider, if that makes sense. I don't support it as a policy. I wish we didn't have it, but since we do, I have to advise you that your student would have an increased chance of acceptance if all those other fit situations are true. Like if the financials are there, if the social and academic is there, then sure. But otherwise, I support, not doing it. And so anyway, he dig into that whole early decision, regular decision thing. So you're going to see a bunch about that. I guess this is one thing worth mentioning is that many schools over enrolled in the last 2 years. And so this year they were being extra conservative with their admissions rates. And so like right now we're kind of waiting to see what happens post May 1st. May 1st is the deadline to submit your commitment to going, your deposit to going to school. So they typically ask for an amount of money to say, yes, we're coming. And you sign a form and say, yes, I'm coming. And that's by May 1st. And so then colleges and universities will know who's coming and who's not, how many seats they've filled and how many they have empty. That's called their yield. And so then they'll know whether they can go to their wait list or not. And so we may see a lot of waitlist movement or we may not, it'll just really depend. And so next month we can talk about what's happened with the waitlist sitch, but I think I'll stop. You guys can flip through. I think big idea was what I said. There were a bunch more applications, but only at certain schools. And my overall takeaway is that it's important to get to know schools well enough to tell them, I see you, I know you, and you are going to love me, and I love you. And I think that's going to be your best chance at gaining acceptance more than tossing out 25 applications. I think the people who tossed out a lot of applications got a lot of rejections because they couldn't do the research and the in-depth work that it takes to really demonstrate that the school is a great fit for you and that you're a great fit for them. So that's my takeaway from what happened this year. Okay, does anybody have anything that they want to discuss before we? I mean, I can stick around, but I don't want to keep you here for forever.
I have kind of two questions, but one is super Garfield specific, so I can ask it
Okay.
later,
Reason.
and the other one is sort of,
Okay.
so may or may not be relevant. I don't know, based on, well, I suppose if you're recording it based on who's on the call.
Yeah.
So the non-Garfield one, you sort of just answered it.
Okay.
But it is, if my student is not, like 4.0 and wrote a novel in third grade material.
He's very common then. He's among friends.
Right. No, but I mean, and also and doesn't want to go to the University of Washington, isn't sort of really shooting for the moon. But there's some schools that I think, he might like to try. Like, what does make sense in terms of saying how many schools to apply to, and what kind of mix? So like, he thinks he could probably get into Western. It's not his first choice. It's not his third choice. He would go, right? And he might change his mind as he thinks about the finances of it over the year or two, because he's, even if we say we can pay for whatever, he's still cognizant of that. But so how many of those schools, like, should he apply to, 2 of those schools or 3, or just 1, and assume that, well, if you don't get into Western, you might as well go to community college and figure it out again in a couple of years, like, I guess I'm curious about that. Like, I think
Mhm.
it makes, you can sort of guess like how many schools that are a stretch to shoot for, but how many schools that you think like, well, I could probably go to Colorado State and I could probably go to Western, whatever, like
Yeah,
how many of those?
yeah. Um, in the contract that you signed, it says that you'll have at least two of those schools
Okay.
that you like, that you actually would be like, yeah, I can go there. And that is going to be, I think, the trick for young people is to like, really find those schools or come to acceptance that these schools really might be the place I go,
Right. You say, like, I'm going to go to Evergreen.
yeah, like,
Yeah.
and so I really don't want any schools to be on there that are schools that the student would pout and complain and, I don't want those on the list if at all
Right. Well, I mean, at
possible.
some point, the
So,
student is going to just choose a different path,
yeah,
right? I mean,
right.
so.
So the goal is to have at least two that are likelies and that they like. And then same with that, a good fit. I'd like to have at least two of those, and I'd like to have at least two like, harder to predict acceptance and still good fits, right? Like not, I mean, yeah, you can, like, I am not a big fan of the Hail Mary, but if that's important to you, what I mean by like that is, like really there's no chance at all, but I want to submit an application. To me, that seems like a lot of extra work. But if the young person wants to do that, like I'm not gonna stop them at all. So I have and then the other thing I've decided to add that it wasn't in the contract is a school that has early rolling admission. So if possible, I'm going to share with them a list, which I can search for in a second, of schools that you can apply early and you can hear back early. So like University of Arizona is a very well-respected state university that offers merit aid for all the different levels of student. And if you are a very top student, a 3.9, a 4.0, you can go to school there for $15,000 a year. Yeah, and they give merit aid for 3.0, it's a certain amount. And if you apply there, they'll tell you within weeks whether you are accepted or not. And they have an honors program, they have film, they have computer science, they have, all the things that students on my list want. And so I'd love for them or University of Denver, similar. They're places that you can apply and you can get it, Western too. You can apply, you can get accepted, and then you can have that going into the fall, like, all right, I'm going somewhere, it's affordable for my family, and that they can feel good about it. So I'm going to ask for that. And then the other thing that I have that we're going to try out is that college kickstart. And I wanted to just show you this sample student is a former student who is like a super top student. So forgive, I'll come up with a sample student who isn't a super top student soon. But so what happens is you put in some schools that you like. So once your kids have come up with their 6 to 12-ish schools, we'll put them in. And this heart means that if you got accepted, you would go. You really love them. You put in, if you have scores, you put those in. You put your weighted and your unweighted GPA in. You won't have your rank yet, but when you have your rank, we'll put that in. And then we click this run kickstart. And so A+ means that it's a well-balanced list, okay? And then they tell us about early admission and an action plan. And so then we look more detailed. We say, okay, on this list, there are 0 unlikelies, there are 5 reaches. They tell us what those are. There are 4 targets, these, and 4 likelies, these. Sometimes they'll say, no, your list is a C-, it's not balanced. And they would tell us here that we need some more likelies or more targets or more reaches. And then here you can go and find them. I like this. It's very satisfying to a data nerd like me. You can put in the different things you're searching for, the areas of the country, the qualities of its admissions. You can put in your major, and then it'll tell you available schools. So does anybody have a particular major you want to see? Okay, history. I'm seeing somebody there. Okay, so history, and then not rural, not small. I'm thinking of a particular person here. And not the South. And I can't remember about not this area. Okay, and then we want great merit aid, and we want test optional, and do we want no extra essay? That would make it smaller. So here we go. Oh no, it didn't make it essay. Oh, that's interesting. And then we want has early action. How about that? No, that didn't make it too much smaller, but it did make it different. Okay, and so then it gave these are the available schools. It's not that many that have these qualities. In there are 800 schools in this database. It's not all 4,000. Anyway, and so then we'd think, okay, we're looking for likelies. Okay, what are some likelies that might work out? Okay, this person's interested. I know, and then the student would be there, and we'd be searching and looking for some options and adding them to the list, etc. And then we'd run it again, and it would be like, okay, now you're better balanced. So let me see if I can. So I'm just gonna add Loyola, Maryland, and then I want to. So they're saying it's still good, but I wanted to show you. Okay, so this next thing, so then they tell you about what your application strategy might be. So given these people's hearts, the sample students, they're saying apply early action to these places and apply regular decision to these other places. And this thing means applying early will boost your likelihood of getting in there by this much, like a little bit. And what I learned about Tulane, never mind, I shouldn't talk about it, but I learned this year that Tulane is going hard in the early decision direction and not early action. They don't want early action, they want early decision only. And so I would now advise differently about that. Anyway, so we're going to use this with your students, and I'll also use my professional knowledge. And so they recommend in your first wave of applications do these, and then in the second wave of applications do this, and then it has this analysis of like that school and its rates and its stats and where you fit, etc. And I can make you a very beautiful report with my schooling doula logo and everything. It's going to be very impressive. Anyway, any questions? That's like one of the fun tools that we have in store for us coming up. But none of that, like even the data is going to tell us, you have this % chance or whatever. And we just have to take it all with a grain of salt this year, because every year is very dynamic right now with things changing quite a bit. So, yeah. Those were good questions. Susan and Rita and Patrick, did you have questions? Anything else you want to talk about? Do you want to hear Suzanne's question about Garfield, or should we say goodbye and then Suzanne can
go? Yeah, we can go.
Okay.
I think I'm all set. I'm going to go tonight too. Yeah. Thank you so much. This was really helpful.
You're so welcome. I'm glad you could join.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye. Okay. And is
So
this appropriate for Garfield families?
Oh,
Or
well,
is
yeah,
this-
sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So the question is literally, I was talking to a Garfield student the other day. I'm not sure where he got this information, but I'm guessing there's some truth to it. So I'm kind of curious of what you know is, so he was talking about University of Washington,
Yeah.
where my kid isn't even interested in going, but I'm curious about what being a student at Garfield, particularly if you're taking AP classes and whatever, gets you, and how far, like, is it just, I'm assuming at the UW they know, and that probably the other Washington State schools, but like, or Seattle U or something, but like, how far does going to Garfield get you?
Yeah.
That's
Well, what did the students say? The reason, so I would
so
love,
he said that his understanding was, and he knew people who really did not have, I mean, I know there are Garfield kids who, well, I don't know actually Garfield kids, they have Franklin kids, so I take it back. I know people who are expecting to get into the University of Washington the last 2 years have not been,
yeah,
and I don't know whether that includes from Garfield, but his knowledge, claimed knowledge from a few people in years ahead was not even as stellar GPAs, just decent Garfield students. And so I was just curious kind of about that, because
yeah.
I'm guessing there is some reputation of the
Oh,
school,
for sure.
but
Yeah, yeah. And for sure there is. And definitely UW Seattle knows all about Garfield and, yeah, they live in the same city and they have a good relationship. Um, the place that I think would be the best to look for this data is something that I don't have access to, but that you might through
it's
Naviance.
in Naviance.
There's
Okay.
supposed to be a place, there's supposed to be scattergrams, like, and I've seen other people's
Oh yeah.
scattergrams.
Okay.
And on the scattergram, you're supposed to be able to look for a particular school and
Hmm.
it'll show the distribution of kids who applied there and whether they got in or were waitlisted or were
Right.
rejected. And you
Right.
can hover over any particular data point and it'll show the student's GPA and their test scores if they were part of it. And so we're supposed to be able to see that data. Like, and as I say, I'm right now not able to access that since I'm not a parent. And I have tried, I had a Garfield student look for it, but they couldn't find it. But now I have found it with a non-Garfield student. So now I kind of want to go back and see in the Garfield Naviance if it's there or not. Yeah, to see the track record because I did have a Garfield student this year who did apply in biology, which is they don't call it impacted, they call it, so I can't remember, but very popular major, con constrained, I think maybe is their word.
Right.
Um, uh, and had an excellent, GPA and and I thought a very solid application and strong activities and leadership positions and all sorts of stuff. And they were waitlisted. And you know, and I wasn't really sure how they could tell that person didn't actually want to go to University of Washington, which is true, So I like all worked out. It all worked out. I'm thinking there must be a very large number of Garfield students who apply to University of Washington and don't yield. And so I'm imagining that they're getting hip to that and that they're now that they have so many more applications coming in, that they're potentially being more selective with who they admit. And they might not admit like super high flyers who, have full intentions of going other places. That said, I had a student who was, 1600 SATs 4.0, mechanical engineering, who did get admitted to honors and did get admitted to the mechanical engineering program and is going there. So, and another student who got the only one of 7 people to get this big, impressive merit scholarship. So,
Right. Well, I mean, it is hard to know in some ways. Like, I guess what I was wondering, like obviously, if you look at the scattergram, it's only going to tell you so much because let's say it's kind of self-selecting. Like,
yeah.
Oh, look, all the kids who went to Garfield who applied to Princeton got in, except that all those kids were like really, really well qualified, right? And
whatever,
had
yeah,
and legacy parents and whatever. And so that doesn't really tell me whether Princeton has any knowledge whatsoever of Garfield,
Oh,
right?
well,
And so
okay. Well, what I will tell you is that it's the college admissions officer's job to know about the high schools in their region. So many colleges and universities have a system where they have regional admissions representatives. And
Right.
so like they're located in the region and they
Right,
travel around and visit the schools and stuff. And so that's very true at a lot of places. And that's why Garfield like sends the school profile. I mean, people, they know, and that's part of the application process is who is the student, where did they go to school, and how did they do compared to the other people who went to that school. And so like, how does their rigor compare to the next person's rigor, like given what was available to them, et cetera. And, so that is true. And so people do know Garfield in that way. It's just exactly what sense do they make of Garfield? That's probably an individual admission officer thing. And I am wondering, like, I know that algorithms for college admissions now are taking into account zip code and likelihood of, financial contribution over time and, yucky things like that. So it makes me
Interesting.
wonder,
Oh,
you know,
right. Well, I mean, because if you say, well, my kid went to Garfield and, based on my zip code, luckily mine's not as big, but like, I can afford to pay for the school, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm comparing that to a student who did better with grades, but, went to nowhere high school and, and just a lot, like lower everything else.
mhm. Yeah,
Theoretically, I mean, obviously they can just see the classes that are offered and all that kind of stuff and the zip code and
yeah,
the school profile
yeah.
and know that, okay, this student is a better chance potentially,
Mhm.
but not necessarily maybe this kid who worked really, I mean, so
Yeah.
I know it's all kind of a crapshoot.
Yeah, and they talk about it as holistic review, and so they try to take into account all of that, and that's really their job is to know who's applying and what context they come from. And as much as there is an opportunity to tell about that on the application, that's the student's job also to say, here's who I am and here's where I come from and here's why or what I did and why I did it. And there are sections called the additional information section or the COVID section, several places where you can kind of explain more about your context. In the University of California, which I know is potentially on the list, they have a whole section where they just want you to tell about the academic context from which you come, because they sometimes, well, they don't look at transcripts.
Right.
And so they don't necessarily know anything about your high school. Like they don't get the school profile. They don't do any of that.
They
And
don't?
so, no. So
They
that's
just look at your GPA. They
University
don't
of
look at anything
California.
else
They look
related
at your
to it.
application. And so
Yeah.
you put everything on the application. Basically, you write your own little school profile of where you're coming from. So that's why, yeah, I mean, applying to the University of California is great if that's what you really want. If it isn't what you really want, it is really a project. So,
Right. Well, like I said, that was my advice. All right, I need to go
Bye.
feed everybody in my family still, but
Okay,
all right.
great.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
You're welcome.
Right.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.